Good morning, Year 6. This week in reading, we are going to continue with The Explorer. I know, how exciting. This is our final week continuing on reading Explorer as our novel in reading, but we will continue to read it as a class. So this week, we're going to start off with the vocabulary and then our activities. But firstly, what I'd like to say is well done to the children who are sending in pages of them reading. For example, a special shout out to Janaya and Millie in Kent class, who both sent in reading a page from the extract using their expression and tone in their voice. I want to see you all now reading the extract and sending them into your teachers on Seesaw. I cannot wait to award extra dojos for those of you who are actually sending in them reading. So let's start with our vocabulary. I'm going to have my turn and you're going to follow after me. So the first word is protective. And this is an adjective, which means it's intending to protect someone or something. So for example, in a sentence, you could say the NHS are currently wearing protective equipment to save themselves from the virus. Protective. Our next word, which we have previously had before, can you remember when we used the word jerked? Jerked is a verb, and that means to move very suddenly or to make something move suddenly. For example, in a sentence, you could say, the train jerked forward and the passengers fell to one side. Jerked. The next word we have is engraved. And this is a verb which means to cut or carve a text or a design on a surface of a hard object. So for example, you could say his watch was engraved so that it had sentimental value. Engraved. The next word we have is surreptitiously, and that is a verb, and it means in a way that attempts to avoid notice or attention. It's usually doing something quite secretively. So for example, in the sentence we could say, he hid the answers surreptitiously under his sleeve so that he could cheat in the exam. Surreptitiously. We then have furrowed, which is an adjective, and it's to describe making lines appear above your face, above your eyes. So for example, Miss Ahad here is furrowing her eyebrows, and you can see that I have lines here on my forehead. Furrowed. Next word we have is belched, and there can be two ways to describe belch. So for example, they're both verbs. In this context that we're using is to provide a large amount of substance such as gas or smoke, but it can also be used to describe someone who's burping quite a lot. So if I was using belched in the context of something having a lot of smoke, I would say the car belched and smoke. The car belched and smoke rose across the sky. Belch. Then have an adjective which is proprietorial, and this is behaving as if one owned a particular thing or person. It's being quite possessive. So for example, in this picture, I'm going to describe the business owner here as having proprietorial pride over his business because he's worked so hard. Proprietorial. We then have fumbled, and this means to handle or act quite clumsy. Fumbled. We're now going to go through the words together, each of us having a turn saying it out aloud. That way we can hear us if we're saying it correctly, and then we're going to go into our activity. Protective. Jerked. Engraved. Oh, I can't hear you. Surreptitiously. Louder. Surreptitiously. Furrowed. Belched. Proprietorial. Fumbled. Your activity is to find, so for example, here I've got a word, but I'm missing the definition. So if you're writing it out, please write out the word and then the definition. If you're printing it out, please just go in and fill in the blanks. So the first word here we've got is protective. I need to find a definition. So my definition for protective would be to intend to protect someone or something. So that's what I would do. I'll go in and fill it in. So now I'd like you to pause the video and have a go at the activity. Please do not continue with the video until you have finished, showing yourself that integrity to mark your work honestly. Okay, so now I'm going to go on and give the answers. So for the first word, you were missing the definition. So for protective, you missed the definition, which is to intend to protect someone or something. Then we have jerked, That's the word that was missing, and it means to move very suddenly or to make something move suddenly. We then have the word engrave, but we're missing the definition, which is to cut or carve on the surface of a hard object. So you can almost describe your initials, for example, being engraved on a handbag, for example. Next, we have proprietorial, and the definition for that is behaving as if one owned a particular thing or person. So it's being quite possessive, you could also say. The word that was missing there is belched. So that's to produce a large amount of substance such as gas or smoke, and it's usually quite harmful. And then we're missing the definition for furrowed, and that means to make deep lines appear on your face above your eyes. And that is in a way to avoid an attempt to be noticed. So you're actually being quite secretive here. Lastly, we have fumbled, which means to do something or handle something quite clumsily. So well done if you got all of those correct. If you haven't, please just go in with a different colour pen and write in the correct definition. Or if you've got the word mixed up, please just go in and rewrite the word correctly. Now, we are going to go on to our second activity. So you're matching the sentence activity in front of you. If you're writing out the sentences, that's absolutely fine. Please make sure you write out the sentences fully. So let's go on to that second activity. For this activity, you will need a ruler and a pen or a pencil. If you haven't got a ruler at home, that's absolutely fine. Please try to draw your lines as straight as you can. Okay, so I'm going to model the first one with you, and then you're going to pause the video and come back to the video once you're finished so we can go through the answers together. So the first sentence, we need to match our sentences together. So the first sentence is, well, half the fragment of the sentence is, Jim felt he had to be protective. Well, I know being protective is intending to make sure something is safe. So I'm going to look for a sentence that matches with something. So I'm going to read them out aloud to myself at each step he took, because it adds a personal touch, using his secret handheld device, and his gaze drifted off in thought over his new laptop, because she knew she completed every task herself, with the ring of his harness, the factory chimney beside the river. When I know the sentence that will fit in with being protective is over his new laptop. Before I join them together, I'm going to read it out and double check. Jim felt he had to be protective over his new laptop. That definitely makes sense, which means he has the intention to keep it safe, probably because it's new. Now, I'd like you to pause the video. Come back to the video once you have finished matching up your sentences. Do not continue playing the video unless you have finished, showing yourself that integrity that you can mark your work. Okay, now let's start. Our next sentence, half the sentence, is he began to fumble. Well, I know fumble means to handle something clumsily. So this means that this person was probably handling something and it's quite acting quite crazy. Clumsy, sorry. So I know that this sentence will actually go in with the ring of his harness, which suggests that to me that he was actually being quite clumsy whilst he was handling her ring. So maybe walking quite funny or jumping around, who knows. Next we have, during the festive season, I get my gifts engraved. Well, engraved means to cut or carve a text onto. It could be a hard object, it could be quite a soft object, like a cushion, for example, but it's to cut or carve a text into something. So I know that definitely means during the festive seasons, I get my gifts engraved because it adds a personal touch, which means it's quite sentimental if you get them engraved. And that means it could have someone's initials on them, for example, like Fred's watch. Next, we have Josh made a recording surreptitiously, which suggests that he was actually trying to avoid anyone looking at him, so quite secretive. So Josh made a recording surreptitiously using a secret handheld device, which means maybe he was cheating or recording something that he didn't want anyone to see. Next, we have his brows furrowed again. Oh, furrowed means to make deep lines in your face, and it's usually above so next to your forehead is usually where you furrow your to allow deep lines to appear, so that's where you are furrowing. His brows furrowed again. Oh, let's have a look. This sentence will definitely fit with, and his gaze drifted off in thought, because it's showing that His eyebrows were furrowing, so almost like making a crumple on top of his face, so where his forehead is. And he was just gazing off, so which means he wasn't really thinking straight. Puffs of smoke belched from. Well, I know belch means to produce large amount of smoke, so definitely has to do with the chimney. So puffs of smoke belched from the factory chimney beside the river, suggesting that there was a lot of smoke coming next to the factory chimney, which was next to the river. Next, we have, she stared at her homework with proprietorial pride. Oh, this means that she was quite possessive over her homework, quite behaving that she owned the homework and she was very proud of it. So she stared at her homework with proprietorial pride because she knew she completed every task herself. And then lastly, he could not walk well on a tiptoe as his body jerked. Well, remember, jerked means to move quite suddenly or to make something move quite suddenly. So in this instance, it's his body moving quite suddenly at each step he took. So my ruler's not long enough, so I'm going to do 2 lines. Remember to keep your matching activity as neat as possible. So now that you have finished this activity, I would like you to mark each sentence. So you could just mark by the box and then take a picture and upload it onto Seesaw. We're now going to read our text together, so I'd like you to have your text in front of you. If you don't have it in front of you, that's absolutely fine. You can enlarge the screen and read it off the screen with me. Okay. Before you start to follow the text along with Miss Ahad, I'd like you to use a ruler if you have the text in front of you, or a pen. If you're using it on your computer screen, please make sure you follow the text using your mouse cursor. This will help you identify where you are and what point I've asked you to stop so you can continue on reading. Okay, so let's start. Fire. The grubs, which means the food, when mixed with the cocoa beans and pounded, which means hit heavily, with a clean stick turn into a paste. If you squinted and were of an optimistic temperament, which means if you had a positive outlook, look like flour and water. Now, we just make a fire and cook them, said Fred. Just, said Con, we need a flint. A flint is almost like a sharp, hard rock, and it's used with steel to produce an igniting spark within a fire. We need kindling. Kindling is another word for small sticks or twigs, and that's used to light a fire. We need kindling, said Lila. And matches, said Con. So you can see here, this is all the equipment that they need in order to start the fire. I'll do the kindling, said Fred. Most of the wood surrounding them had dried since the rain the night before. He held the hem of his cricket jumper in his teeth and made a hammock for the wood. The hem of his cricket jumper, which means the size of his cricket jumper, and he did that in order to make almost like a bag out of his jumper whilst he was wearing it in order to hold all of the wood. The night in the jungle had not improved the taste of the wool. He came back to the clearing and tipped the wood into a pile, a few paces away from the den. There were flints in there, said Lila. We could rub away the moss and use them to make a spark. Flints don't go off. Moss is like almost like when you go to a park, for example, and you see some trees, it's almost like the mini plants that grow off wood. Flints don't go off. Flints aren't enough by themselves, said Fred. I've tried. You need a bit of steel. Lila ducked into the den to fetch the flint. Con was staring at Fred's watch. What's that made of? Fred stared down at the watch, covering it protectively with his hand. Glass. Ooh, protectively is one of our key vocabulary words for this week. I'd like you to pause the video and have a look. Do you remember what protective means? Well done if you said it's intending to protect something or someone. So for example, in this instance, it is intending to, Fred is trying to cover it because he doesn't want anyone to take or spot the watch's materials. And still, he said, my father gave it to me when I went to boarding school. But it's broken, said Con. I know that, he said. So, said Con, if it's broken, it's not really a watch anymore, is it? But what it is a lump of steel. Fred jerked his hand back, which means he moved his hand suddenly, just like I've done here. Moved my hand suddenly. His father never bought his birthday gifts. He left it to his secretary to take Fred to Harrods and pick out something sensible. Harrods is a department store in London. This was the only gift Fred could remember his father choosing himself. He had it engraved with Fred's initials. Engraved is another one of our key vocabulary words, and that means to cut or carve on a surface of a hard object. So, for example, here, Fred's watch, the back of his watch was engraved with his initials, which means that's probably why the watch is quite sentimental. It means something. It's very special to Fred, which is why he doesn't want to give it away. Lila nodded. It might be the only way, she said. Her voice had sympathy in it, but grit too, which shows she probably feels sorry for him, but she knew that they needed that watch, so she didn't feel too bad. Fine, said Fred. He had an unaccountable, absurd need to cry. Fine, we'll use it. Absurd means weird need to cry. Can I have first try? Asked Con. It's my watch. I know, but I've never lit a fire before, she said. Not even the ones in the fireplace at home. Not even on bonfire night, Fred asked. Not aloud. There was longing and hunger in her eyes. She looked away from him, turning the flint over and over in her hand as if it was a jewel. But there was something written in her face, Fred thought, something in a code, but he couldn't begin to read. Here, slowly he undid the strap. He held the watch in his fist, surreptitiously tracing the letters on the back with his thumb. Remember, surreptitiously is one of our key words as well. I'd like you to pause the video and see if you remember what that means. Well done if you said it. It's a way that attempts to avoid or notice attention. It's quite secretive. Con watched in silence. He put it in her palm. I get second go. Lila heaped shredded leaves and dried grass in a pile. You do it over that, she said, so the spark has something to catch. Con struck the back of the watch against the stone. Fred winced, which means he let out almost like a little cry. She overshot and dug the flint into her own skin. She said nothing and tried again. She bit down on her tongue, concentrating. Her eyebrows furrowed so deeply they nudged against her eyelashes, striking and striking until her fingers were raw. Furrowed here suggests that she was concentrating really hard to make sure she can start the fire. Suddenly, flint and steel let off a tiny spark. Con was so stunned she fumbled the flint. Again, shrieked Mac. Again! The spark came again, a brief flare into the world that vanished as it came. It needs to be lower over the kindling, said Lila. Con struck again, and again. The spark caught against a blade of grass, which caught against another. Fred's heart leapt, and he dropped to his stomach and blew on the scrap of fire. Terrified, he would blow it right out. The flame faltered, which means it was losing strength. No, don't die, said Con. I'd like you now to read on from Lila added a handful of dry moss to the end of flames. Pause the video and have a go at reading. If you have read something incorrectly or have missed a word, go back in and reread that sentence so you can understand it in context as well. Making self-corrections is a great way of learning rapidly. We could sleep in shifts, said Con, to make sure it doesn't go out. She looked at the fire with proprietorial pride. Proprietary is one of our key vocabulary words, and that means she almost looked at it with possessive pride, as if she owned the fire. We made that by ourselves. Fred put the watch quietly in his pocket. It was scratched now and deeply dented, but inside his pocket he clutched to it so tightly it dug a circular bruise into his palm. It's the most beautiful fire I've ever seen, said Lila. Yes, said Con, by far. Max bit lightly at Lila's arm. Can we eat now? I'm so hungry I might die. Fred scrabbled in the dust with his nails until he found a flat stone and balanced it, wobbling dangerously on 4 green wood sticks over the centre of the flames. Lila divided the grub paste into 4 balls and spread them on the stone. Eventually the pancakes began to bubble. That means that the paste that they were making is actually a pancake batter. Lila poked them. They are getting harder, she said. And they smell like a shoe, said Con. That probably means they are done. One of the trees near the den had vast fleshy leaves as big as serving dishes. Fred pulled them down and dropped a grub pancake onto each one. They were hot to touch and gooey. They are probably best while they are so hot. You can't taste them, said Fred. He bit off half the pancake, trying not to chew too much. It tasted disconcertingly animal. It was, he thought, like eating porridge mixed with fingernail growth. But it was better, wildly, infinitely better than nothing. So again, showing that he's quite appreciative of the food that they're having, even though it's not much, it's just pancakes. Con nibbled the corner of hers. She grimaced. Grimace has two different meanings. In this context, it's actually that she's not angry, she's actually disapproving of the pancakes, and she probably didn't enjoy the taste of it. That's what it's suggesting. But she didn't spit it out. To be honest, it's not that much worse than school dinner, she said, and she smiled half a smile. Max kept his food scrunched in his fist, guarding it from the others. I don't like sharing, he said. His pancake oozed out from between his fingers. Now, I'd like you to continue reading from the clearing was growing darker every minute till the end of con. So the star where I've noted here. Remember to read it clearly using your expression in the tone of your voice, reading it out aloud. So pause the video and read till the end of con. Lila's smile was sudden and enormous. It showed that one of her teeth was wonky and she had a dimple in her cheek. We could call it Lavatory. It wasn't terribly funny, but once Fred started laughing, he couldn't stop. Con choked and had to bite her fist. Max's laughter sent a ribbon of snot flying out across the glade. They laughed loudly enough to scare the birds and to make the distant monkeys roar angrily from their night perches in the trees. Well done for reading the text along with Miss Ahad. Now, what I'd like you to do is you're going to pick a page from the text and you're going to record yourself reading it on Seesaw. Your teachers would love to hear you reading, so I'd like you all now to pause the video. You're going to now go and get hold of your text. That could be in front of you, or if you've printed it out, that's absolutely fine. And now I'd like you to pick a page. It could be, for example, page 62, and you're going to read it out aloud, showing that expression and tone in your voice so your teachers can listen to you read. So happy reading, and I cannot wait to listen to you all read.